Well, I want to welcome Elie Honig to the podcast. Ellie's the senior legal analyst for CNN. Before that, he was an AUSA in the Southern District of New York. He went to Harvard Law School. He's written 3 books: Hatchet Man, How Bill Barr Broke the Prosecutor's Code and Corrupted the Justice Department; Untouchable, How Powerful People Get Away with It; and the 3rd book, the one we're going to talk about today, When You Come at the King, Inside DOJ's Pursuit of the President. There it is, from Nixon to Trump. So welcome to the show, Elie.
Thank you for having me, David. So before we get into it, if I can. So first of all, I'm a fan of this podcast. It is great. I'm not just saying this to sort of puff you up, but I do want to just take a minute, if I can, to thank you for the episode you did with Chris Morvillo, right? Because Chris was a colleague. He was well older than me, but I overlapped with him for a year or so at the SDNY. He second sat me on something, not a trial, but maybe a hearing, and was just the greatest human being, and we all loved him. And just by freak of life, a week or 2 after you did the podcast with him, he tragically passed away in a horrible accident. And I went back and listened to your podcast with him, and I told many others to do that. And I thought, A, it's a riveting story that he tells about that trial, but B, it's such a perfect capturing of who Chris was in his literal voice. Just the kind of joy that he brought to this profession. And I'm sure, I can't speak for his family, but I'm sure that his brothers, who are also lawyers, are thrilled that record of him exists. And it was touching for me to listen to that. I'm grateful you did that.
Well, thanks for saying that. That was a great episode, and a great way to remember him. I still think about him a lot. And I had never met Chris in person. And when we were getting ready for the podcast episode, we said, we got to get together. And he said, well, I'm going to do this great celebration first. And he texted me when he got there. And I think about it all the time. Like, it's so crazy. He spent his 10 years of his life getting ready for this trial. He wins it. And it's so tragic. What happens makes me crazy.
Yeah, it really is a reminder of just, not to get super corny, but of just how, how precious this is, and that nothing's for granted. So, yeah.
So did you work with Chris at SDNY?
So Chris was there. I mean, we probably overlapped for a year or so. I was brand new and he was established. And, as you probably know, your first couple big things, you get assigned a second seat to babysit you. And so Chris babysat me. I think it was a suppression hearing, if I remember. It was not a jury trial. But and I was scared. I remember when they said, "Okay, Chris Morvillo is gonna be your second scene." I was like, "Oh boy!" I mean, not that it was, I just knew he was a very well respected guy. And I went up. I have a very distinct memory of going into his office, sitting down, and immediately being put at ease. Like, oh, okay, he's not pretentious. He's not a hotshot. He's not an egomaniac. So yeah, we overlapped, I guess, a year or two, something briefly. But his whole family is sort of royalty in the New York. His father was a legendary lawyer in the city. He has all these, I forget, he has like 4 brothers or something. We're all. So yeah, what a tragedy. But again, a great remembrance of him.
You mentioned the word hotshot, and I was going to ask you about this. Your nickname, of course, was Hotshot Honig. And so I wanted to ask you how you got that nickname from one of your mob trials, right?
Yeah, so I was the lawyer on one of the trials of John Gotti Jr. This was the 4th and final one. There's a longer story to it. In fact, it would overlap with Florida a bit because he had been charged. Right. We didn't want the case, right? It was charged 3 times before I had anything to do with it. Florida charges him. It gets sent back to us. I end up trying the case, and the Gotti family, there's always interesting dynamics in the courtroom. It. Sometimes you end up sort of cordial, friendly with the defendant, the defense lawyer. But at these mob cases, and I'm sure a lot of, other cases, the family's there. So at the Gotti case, they were stacking the courtroom with family members and sycophants and, hangers on. And the Gotti family started hissing at me, and to the media, they would call me Hotshot Honig. Now, let me just say, this was entirely intended as an insult. But it's also like one of the nicest things anyone's ever. I mean, my friends from growing up call me way worse than that on a daily basis.
It's great.
So I embrace that put down by all means.
Who are the defense lawyers in that case?
Charlie Carnesi, who has since gosh, now that I think about it, it was Charlie Carnesi who has since passed away. Do you know Charlie?
No, I've heard of him, of course. Yeah.
Charlie was like a classic, like Brooklyn, Queens. He was a mob lawyer. I don't think I did 4 or 5 cases against Charlie, a couple trials, 2, 3 trials. I don't think I ever saw a stationary. Like literally, he did not write motions, but he was, he knew how to talk to a jury. He's a New Yorker, and they related to him. He was charismatic. He was a good lawyer. Joseph Carrazzo, who.
Right.
His father is reputedly a member of the Gambino family. and but a good lawyer also. And then a guy named John Maringolo who also passed away, but young. John was like my age. I don't know exactly what happened, but so yeah, gosh, this is I'm dating myself here.
One of the great Gotti lawyers was a guy named Albert Krieger from Miami. I don't know if you ever met
No,
Albert, one
no.
of these great lawyers. He's since passed away as well. But I
Mm.
remember seeing Albert when I was a young lawyer, and he had this booming voice. And I thought to myself, like, I will never be able to do what this guy does in the courtroom. He was that good.
Yeah.
He was so good. So, who were your mentors at the SDNY when you were
Yeah.
there?
Great question. Mimi Roca was my unit chief for several years. People probably know her. She was elected Westchester County, New York DA. Decided she didn't want to run again, but people know her from TV and things like that. My three, I said you had to be second sat your first three trials. My first trial was Richard Sullivan, who's now a Second Circuit judge. Great guy. I wrote about him a little bit in Hatchet Man. He was tough, intimidating. My second was David Anders, who's Mimi's husband and is now a partner at Wachtell. And my third was Maylin Kwanget, who's a very accomplished. She's a lawyer at I forget which one of the big firms. So certainly all three of them. I mean, there's so many role models when you're in a
Yeah.
place like this, right? It's like, I mean, you find yourself as a first year there just in awe, just looking at these people. And the funny thing is, they feel like they're so much more accomplished than you, but they're like 6 years older than you, And,
Right.
and a couple years later, like you're the one with a dozen trials or whatever. But man, Jen Rogers also, I should say, who you probably know from CNN. Jen and Mimi were my chiefs. Preet was my boss for several years. Preet Bharara
Right.
was the U.S. attorney. So that's to name a few.
I argued the Ghislaine Maxwell bail appeal in front of Richard Sullivan, and when I saw Judge Sullivan on the panel, I thought, I'm not gonna. This is not a great draw
No.
for us.
He
Not a
doesn't
great
tend to
draw.
bail. Yeah, yeah. Rich is a very he has high demands and expectations of everybody. I remember one time when he went to the scariest thing is appearing in front of a judge who you used to work with.
Right, of course.
Because Rich knows all our tricks and everything. And I remember, the defense lawyer raised some question about whether I'd comply with my Brady Giglio obligations. And Rich sort of Judge Sullivan looked at me and went, I know that he will because I taught him. It's like, okay, that's pressure.
Right.
Yeah.
It's funny you say that because a lot of times criminal defense lawyers don't like when we have to appear in front of other criminal defense lawyers who have become judges because they
Yeah.
know our shtick. They know what we do. It's sometimes prosecutors make better judges, former prosecutors than defense lawyers.
Well, I'll give you another example from Rich of this. It's so in the weeds, but you and your audience will get it. So we used to have a rule that when you had a plea agreement, it had to be signed by the line AUSA on the case and then a supervisor. So I had a case with Judge Sullivan, and initially I was signing, and then Mimi or whoever was signing as my supervisor. During that case, I got promoted to supervisor. So I started having my other person on the case with me sign it, and I would sign as the supervisor. And Sullivan takes one look at one of these plea agreements and goes, I see Mr. Honig signing his own plea agreements now. I was like, damn it, only one person would have even picked up on that.
It's great. And of course, you guys call, we all joke that it's the sovereign district of New York. You guys, have this sort of, or I tried one case there a couple years ago. And I have to say the prosecutors were really smart and really good.
Yeah.
I was closing on my 50th birthday. So I'm going to be 53 in November. So it was 3 years ago. And I remember, sorry for the long story, but I remember saying in closing, there's nothing I'd rather be doing on my birthday than giving this summation for an innocent man. And the prosecutor, to his credit and very quick in his rebuttal, said, I know what Mr. Markus is going to be wishing for tonight when he's blowing out the candles, some better evidence. And I thought, like, wow, that was pretty good. Like,
Damn.
pretty good on his feet to do that.
That's vintage SDNY right there. Yep.
Yeah, pretty good. So after you leave SDNY, how do you get into doing the on-air stuff and CNN stuff? I mean, it's such most lawyers dream of this. You actually did it. How do you do it?
There was zero, trust me when I say there was never a plan to do this. This was happenstance. I fell ass backwards into it. So I had been a prosecutor all told for 14 years. Summer of 2018, I finished my time as a prosecutor. And that was the height of the Mueller investigation, right smack in every day. Manafort, Michael Flynn, Roger Stone, Michael Cohen, right? And Mimi, the aforementioned two people, Mimi Roca and Dan Goldman, who's now in Congress. Of course, people know Dan. Had recently left the SDNY, were doing this, and they both sort of said, well, they need prosecutors like all day, every day, 18 hours a day. And so we'll pass if you want, we'd pass your name on to producers. I said, yeah, please do. and I just started doing CNN and at the time MSNBC, even a little bit of Fox News. And at the end of that summer, I was sort of hit me at a certain point, like, oh, I might be able to sign with somebody here. CNN made me an offer, and I signed with CNN. Now I'm 7 years in with them. But that was how it all started. But there was never, I never took a journalism class. I never thought I would become the next Dan Abrams or, it just happened organically and unexpected. I'm not saying anyone forced me. I love doing this. And I sought out the opportunity, but this was never a plan.
And is it your full-time gig? Like you do, this is it?
Yeah, I mean, I teach at Rutgers undergrad where I went. I teach about prosecution. I know you teach at Miami, right? Law school?
Yeah.
So I teach a similar, it's not a law school, but I teach about prosecution and that kind of stuff. I teach 2 or 3 classes undergrad. I'm at a law firm, Lowenstein Sandler, but I do very little. What I do is, per diem, not per diem, percentage of what I do, but I'm of counsel there. CNN, I write weekly for New York Magazine, and now, my 3rd book. So that's it.
One of the things you mentioned just now, everybody they want prosecutors to be on the air. And I was going to ask you this a little later, but I'll ask you this now. No, it's always so weird to me, and not to take anything away from former prosecutors, but I always feel that, it is odd that they very rarely want, and we're seeing more and more, and it's getting better, but very rarely do they ask, like, for criminal defense lawyers to come on and give the other side. And so a lot of times, like, I'm pulling my hair out. You're fair, but a lot of former prosecutors tell the story from a former prosecutor point of view, and it drives me nuts.
I can't explain it except to say that there's some cachet about the former prosecutor tag that I benefit from. And look, I mean, there are a certain breed of former prosecutors that just like to go on air and, the minute an indictment comes out and go, oh, this guy is cooked. It's over. I was a and it's like, it's actually better education for the audience and usually more accurate to say, here's where we are in the process. Here's what we know. Here's what we have to do to get an indictment. It's fine to say, I've looked at this indictment and it looks shaky or it looks super strong, but a lot of people want, the way you get the clip, if that's what you're searching for, is to go on and proclaim this is a slam dunk, the nail's in the coffin. And I never gave into that. There are times, look, there are certainly times I'll say this looks like a really strong case, but I think I like when we have more defense lawyers on. I think we need more people to come on and burst the bubble a little bit and give a reality check. I mean, look, a lot of my second book, the basic premise of my second book was this was written in 2022 when everyone knew Trump was going to get indicted, but we hadn't even had Jack Smith appointed yet. And I sort of said, everyone wants to bury this guy and say he's cooked and, what's his prison number going to be? And one of the central theses of that book is it ain't going to be as easy as you all think. And here's why.
Right. I mean, it does. I'm always fascinated by powerful people to go back to your other book and whether they do get a fair shake or not. People think, to go back to OJ and Michael Jackson, that they walked because they had the money to hire great lawyers. But in a lot of ways, there's a lot of disadvantages with being rich and famous and being in court. You draw the best prosecutors, you draw all their resources, you draw lots of media. There are downsides to it as well.
Well, look at Sean Combs, right? I mean, I mean, it's a perfect example. I don't know that Sean Combs would have been charged at all, and certainly not. He was overcharged. I said I am on videotape for CNN saying during that trial they're not going to get him on racketeering. That's an overcharge. So I think that's an example. And look, even in the book that the current book, I mean, it's a little different. It's not quite the same as being a celebrity, but there are times plenty of times when presidents and other powerful officials are subjected to extra levels of scrutiny because of their power.
What happened with the Southern District of New York? Like, why did they prosecute Diddy in this case? It seemed like everybody, I mean, far and wide was saying, like, this is a weird case for the federal government to go after, especially the Southern District of New York. It seems sort of outside of their typical thing.
Yeah, I can't really explain it. I mean, look, the sequence, I think, maybe tells us something. There was all the civil suits came first, right? Then the media uproar came second, then the prosecution came third, and the prosecution was overdone. And listen, the defense lawyers did a great job on that one. I mean, I know Agnifilo a bit, and I just thought they did a good job of basically pointing out, like, you can have all the bottles of lube you want. Like, that's not a crime. And yeah, they really, they took the case apart. Yeah.
As somebody who's on TV all the time, it must bother you that we can't watch the Diddy trial, right? Like, shouldn't we have cameras in the courtroom? Shouldn't we be able to see what's going on? It drives me bananas.
I have done a 180 on this and maybe an opportunistic.
No.
If you, well, no, I'm saying if you would have asked me when I was a prosecutor, I would have said no
Oh,
cameras in the
okay.
courtroom. Absolutely not. The last thing I wanted, I didn't want people playing for the cameras. I didn't want the pressure of the cameras. I didn't want the focus. Now I'm 180 different. Now I think everything should be televised. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous that it's not, if you think about it, right? Like everyone agrees trials are public, right? Speedy and public trial. And we absolutely have the easiest technology in the world to at least broadcast the live stream audio, which we're getting slowly around to. I mean, many more appeals arguments, including the Supreme Court, are now at least live streamed audio. But yeah, I mean, look, I do not believe that cameras in the courtroom cause lawyers to behave outrageously. I think it's a good thing. I think people want to see these trials. People are interested in them. It's part of public life. And I think that our administrators and bureaucrats in the federal courts in particular just intentionally being Luddites. They don't want to open this up because that's just not how they want to do it.
It's crazy. We have sketch artists of
Right.
these courtroom scenes.
You
Like,
see them on TV. We're so desperate for audio, for video, for visuals. We bring these women who I knew, remember, who used to draw me on air, and we asked, "What did you see? What did it look like?" Here's a sketch from 1920. Yeah.
it's so bad.
Yeah.
Another thing before we get to the book that I wanted to ask you about is, and this again sort of relates to the Southern District of New York, but also many districts now, but New York started the way, is these press conferences that New York has now when indictments come out. I was attuned to it in the Maxwell case, but it happens now in all of these cases where there's these huge press conference
Yeah.
speaking indictments. Is that how it was when you were there?
Oh,
And
yeah.
yeah. I mean, has
Yeah.
it evolved at all?
No, I mean, we would get a notice. There's a press conference today. We would all go down and pile into that room. And, this is another thing where I think my thinking has evolved a bit. At the time, listen, I've done when I was at the New Jersey AG's offices, like I've stood at the podium and announced cases. I used to think it's great, it's normal, it's what we should do. I honestly think that if you really drill into the deep inner core of any prosecutor, they will admit that it's probably not the most ethical, most fair practice in the world, right? They always go, oh, we're constrained to saying what's in the indictment, but it's so much more than that. It's showy. Sometimes we spread out guns and drugs on the table. I actually think, like, in our heart of hearts, if any prosecutor or former prosecutor is being honest with you, they understand that that's not really consistent with the presumption of innocence, and it's probably better practice to not do them. The contrary would be, well, but we like to inform the public. It's like, yeah, but that doesn't really, that's not a trump card, so to speak. Like, right, you still have your obligations towards the defendant. So I'm kind of ambivalent about them now.
Yeah, and the defense lawyers are really constrained with what they can say
Yeah.
afterwards. They can't do the press conference, especially in New York. There's these crazy press rules really constraining what lawyers can do in New York, and so the
Right.
defense lawyers kind of handcuffed with what they can do.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, but there are defense lawyers who will go off in the media too, right? I mean, there's a lot more a defense lawyer can say, but honestly, that's how it should be. And people go, well, why can a defense lawyer do it and not the prosecution? Because it's different, because there's different burdens of proof. There's different obligations to your client. And so I teach this lesson in my class. I say, not everything is equal as between prosecutors and defense lawyers, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. They're not supposed to be equal in all respects.
Right. I liked to go back to the Diddy case. Tenny Garagos, Mark Garagos' daughter, who have had on the podcast. She was on TikTok talking about the case as it
Smart.
went along. Yeah, smart. I mean, she was out there, responding to things and getting responses. And you saw it in the Karen Reed trial a lot.
Right.
That Karen Reed trial, there was a ton of defense lawyers on social media sort of pushing the agenda. But, you also see it in sort of the more formal, like Greg Craig in that
Sure.
case. He gave a speech on YouTube for himself. So you're seeing more and more of it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think the idea is A, PR matters, and B, maybe you can get, it's harder and harder, I think, now to insulate a jury, really. I mean, back in my day, in your early days, judges would say, well, don't watch it on TV. If something comes on TV about this, change the channel. Or if you see it in the newspaper, put down the newspaper. Now it's like it's fed into your bloodstream through your phone, through social media. You can't avoid it. So, yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
All right. Let's talk about the book a little bit when you come at thinking. First of all, I love the title, of course, because I love The Wire. And so tell us about the title a little bit.
Omar Little is credited in the book.
I saw it.
The funny thing is, we did not have that title when we started. This is now my third book with HarperCollins, same team, same editor, same everything. And I don't think we had any of the titles in place when we started. I knew what I wanted the book to be about. And it hit me. It really was a kind of a lightning bolt moment what I wanted the title to be. Because as I started talking to the people involved, two reasons. One, as I started talking to the people who live these cases, the prosecutors, the defense lawyers, the White House officials, the defendants, the witnesses, the cops, I realized like every trial, you and I do trials, it feels like a death match, right? It's life or death. But these cases are playing out in the public eye, and it is political and personal and professional life or death. And so the stakes feel like they're at that level. And some of my favorite chapters, and you see these, are when I go back and when I have both prosecutor and defense lawyer, and there's a little bit of a back and forth. The other reason is just sort of some of what we've seen, especially in the Trump 2.0, which is this retribution, right? This, you come at the king, you best not miss. The launching of investigations aimed at Jack Smith and Letitia James and now Lisa Cook and all these. And so I thought the title worked nicely in both of those regards. So yes, it is Omar, but I will say I learned in the research for this book that I assumed it's felt like something that he didn't make up, but it goes back to Machiavelli. It's been used for hundreds of years, but Omar said it best.
The life and death point. I like the story, like when Trump found out a special counsel was being, he's like, life is over.
Yeah, my presidency is over. I'm effed. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Good stuff. So how, I'm always fascinated by sort of the process of these things. So how long does it take you to write the book? What's your process for doing it? Do you write a little every day, or how do you do it?
So when I did my second book, I sort of thought I'm like tapped out. Like I've said all the things I have to say. And Harper and I would once in a while bat ideas around. They would go, hey, do you have any interest in writing about this? But it wasn't quite right. And I decided in my head, I'm not going to write this next book until I know. And I read George Stephanopoulos' book, The Situation Room. And what he does is he focuses on an important governmental institution, the Situation Room in the White House, and he tells it through chapters in history, right? Cuban Missile Crisis, on through, 9/11. I'm skipping things, 9/11 and COVID and whatever. And I thought, oh, this is okay. I got it now, right? Special counsel, independent counsel. And so each chapter is Watergate, Iran-Contra, Clinton and Ken Starr, all the way up through Jack Smith and Donald Trump. So I texted my editor, Eric Nelson, and he was like, yes, that's it. We're doing it. And that was about a year ago now. I spent about 6 months, maybe 7 months writing it. I had a rule early on that I had to write 500 words a day. No matter what, even if it was a football Sunday, I had to, turn off the TV for 20 minutes and write 500 words. The way I write is like, get it all out on the page and then craft, edit. And there were days I wrote 500 words and none of them survived.
Right.
But I just wanted to put it all out there. The other thing I did, as you see in this book, I interviewed 35 people on the record. And those interviews largely guided and informed what I did. I would interview somebody, I would have pages and pages of notes and transcripts, but then going through it almost like, I don't want to say the book wrote itself. That's a little bit of an oversimplification, but really guided what I wanted to do. And I approached this book. My first two books were sort of viewpoint driven. My first book was
right.
explicitly a criticism of Bill Barr. My second book was a little bit more, sort of both ways. But the point was basically like, Trump's not going away as easily as you think he is. And this one, I went into it just, I don't know. I'm going to, and some cases you'll see, I can see the argument both ways. Some cases come in for a bunch of criticism and some cases earned praise. But I waited till I heard all the evidence from all the participants.
Did you ever hear on the Bill Barr book? Did you ever hear back from him about it?
No, but it's funny. I guess I shouldn't say who, but we know a couple people in common, pretty close, who have been really cordial. And I actually asked Bill Barr, sorry, I don't know why that happened. Okay. Let me go back just so we can you edit if I?
Yeah.
I actually asked Bill Barr if he would talk to me for this book through this intermediary, and the response was cordial. It wasn't like he loves you, but no, it was just, he said, no, thank you. But no, I know that he knows about the book. I know that for sure. And I know he doesn't like it, but he never has he said, you were wrong about this, or this was a lie or whatever. So, look, I felt it was tough, but fair. And I haven't heard to the contrary.
So you get 35 folks to go on the record, which is pretty incredible. How did you get folks? Did your editors and people help you, or did you reach out to people on your own?
I did it all on my own. So some of them I just know. I know Andy McCabe, who's in the book. I know Carl Bernstein, who's in the book. I know, a handful like that. Others I just went too cold. Like I'll tell you, just Rod Rosenstein. I don't know him. I just emailed him, and people know his response was something like, "I know who you are. You're fair. You're a straight shooter. Sure." There was others that were like pretty involved. I'll tell you, one of my favorite gets was Judy Miller. Judy Miller is the New York Times reporter who got locked up for 35 days, or was 85 days, sorry, on the Scooter Libby case. And I can't say who, but a well-known anchor at CNN gave me Judy Miller's email and said, good luck. She's kind of a recluse. She's kind of like a tough nut to crack. So don't be offended if she's like ignores you or is sort of curt. And same thing as Rosenstein. Just I got a very short, I know who you are. You're straight. Let's talk. And she gave me hours on the record. David Kendall, I listened to your podcast with David. What a incredible amount of stories. But I should say, I did have several people who said, I only want to be anonymous. And I said, I'm not doing it. I said, you can either give me your name and be on the record, or I'm not taking it, because I'm not having it where somebody backs what they say and puts their name on it, and then somebody kind of responds anonymously.
It's
and
so much better.
I would say, 4 out of 5 people who I posed that to said, okay, I'll go on the record. A couple of them bailed, but that's fine. Yeah.
When I think it's so much better to reach out on your own. I do the same, obviously, with the podcast. I don't have any editors or producers or anything, but the example I like using is, your buddy Caitlin Collins. The reason I think she's so successful is she has all these people that she talks to all the time.
100%. Yep.
All these other shows, like, and I've learned a lot through this Maxwell case. The other shows have their producers reach out to you. Hey, will you come on X and Y show tonight? Caitlin's out there, like, really pushing her sources to do it, and I think that's why she gets all these great people on the show.
That is 100% correct regarding Caitlin. And I picked up on that. She and others at CNN, this is sort of my first really deeply reported piece. And another one of our anchors sort of, told me that, once you get a string on a story, you can pull that string and you can get more people. So I would say to, let's say, one of the prosecutors, I would say, look, I've talked to Ted Wells on this thing, and he told me his account. And then the other side's going to want to get in. But, why do people want to talk? I mean, and look, people from recent cases, Bob Bauer talked to me. He defended Joe Biden. This was, a year ago. Yeah. Abby Lowell was 6 months ago defending Hunter. Trump's team, of course, was eager to talk to me. John Lauro. A lot of people, I think, understandably want their version of history. So it's sort of like the farther back, the more willing, right? The Watergate people were thrilled to go on the record. The Clinton and Ken Starr people, there was still a little bit of contention between them, but people want their stories told. But even more recently, I think people trusted that I was going to tell it straight and fair and not look to hammer or cheap shot anyone. And I think I did that with everybody. But yeah, I mean, people want to tell, obviously defense lawyers know enough to protect client confidences and to not waive privilege and all that. But look, I talked to a lot of defense lawyers who did not hold back. I mean, Abby does not hold back. Abby Lowell does not hold back in his book, nor does Bob Bauer, nor does David Kendall, for that matter. So,
right. No, that's what I loved about it. And Lauro really went off too. I mean, I really enjoyed it. I thought that story, you mentioned Ken Starr, and I want to talk about some of the stories, because to me, that's the best part. So when he runs into Monica Lewinsky, it's such a great story. You can tell that story.
It's unbelievable. And Monica wrote about this in Vanity Fair. So they never met. You would assume they would, but you and I did. I mean, if you know how these things work, like, it makes sense. Like, I don't think Preet ever was like meeting the defendants I was prosecuting, when he was U.S. attorney. Like, you wouldn't be the one to do that. I figured, though, at some point they would, but they never physically met. And a few years ago, Ken Starr, of course, died a couple years ago, but a few years before that, Monica was at a quiet restaurant on, I think, Christmas Eve in Manhattan with her family, and she sees this guy, the man in the hat, she calls him, and she's like, could that be? And they had this interaction, and he kept saying, are you okay? Are you okay? And she said he never apologized, but are you okay? And it's remarkable. Monica, look, I mean, she comes out of that chapter as one of the few people, I think, just handled herself really admirably and heroically. And I'm a big admirer of hers now. And it's interesting because it's easy to forget. I actually at one point asked my researchers, I said, people had to at the time, I was in law school at the time, people had to have been criticizing like the way that Monica was being treated and handled and attacked. And the only prominent person who was speaking out about that was, again, I'll say a friend of mine, but Maureen Dowd. From the New York Times, and I quote her in the piece, and she was the only one who was like, what people are doing to Monica Lewinsky is sexist and gross and inappropriate. But that was not what people were largely saying in the
No,
1990s.
not at
Yeah.
all. And
Yeah.
and she never flipped, which was
No,
pretty incredible
she's a
too.
hard
Like
ass, man.
for a
Yeah.
young right for a young person like that with all the pressure, like to stand
Yep.
up and say like I'm not
Yeah.
flipping.
Yep. Absolutely. I love that part of the whole story. Yeah.
Pretty crazy. So the book starts out with another great story. Jill Wine Banks,
Yeah.
and I try to think about like the when she comes home that day and sees, that she's been broken into. I mean, what a crazy, incredible story.
Yeah, so Jill Wine-Banks was one of the prosecutors on the Watergate team. She was known at the time as the Watergate Girl. It's the title of her memoir. She was 30 at the time, and now you can do the math. She's, I don't know, 75 or whatever now. But sharp as a tack and delightful. And my mom even was like, "Oh my God, you know Jill Wine-Banks?" Because they worshipped her, right? She was stylish, and she was the only woman on the team, tussling with the Nixon guys. So Jill has this incredible day where she basically catches Nixon's secretary in a lie about why there was a missing gap on the tape. And she's riding high, and she goes home, and her home in DuPont Circle had been broken into, burglarized. And Jill's first thought was not to jewels and cash, but she kept a cardboard box in her attic. And she went up there, it was still there. But the cardboard box, she told me that what she and some of the other team members were doing was bringing evidence home. Now, not the originals, but they were photocopying their notes and bringing them home because they were worried that the Nixon goons were going to ransack their office and close them down, lock them out, and just shred their evidence. And she said, she gives me a quote in the book, and she says something to the effect of, looking back at it now, I'm not sure how brilliantly we assessed our options, and were we maybe like not on the best side of Rule 6E, the
Right.
secrecy rules, maybe, but we thought we were dealing with a criminal president. And one of the things I love, there's so many historical echoes in this book, and if you fast forward 40 years to the Mueller investigation, Andy McCabe and people on Mueller's team told me that it's a high-tech version of that. They made a point of downloading, backing up their files to a server that was not in their offices, but was like across the street in the FBI. Same concern. So yeah,
So crazy. So where do you do these interviews? Like when you get Jill Wine Banks,
Yeah.
like do you go to her house? Like what do you do?
Mostly on Zoom. I went down to DC and spent hours with David Kendall. I spent hours with Ted Wells in his office, but by and large was Zoom. Yeah, I mean it's the beauty of Zoom.
It's so great, right?
Yeah. But it was great. And the favorite part of going and meeting with these, David Kendall has a whole wall of Williams and Connolly, which is memorabilia, and Ted has these sketch drawings of himself cross-examining Tim Russer. And you can really, I love those flavors and details, the little things that you get from people.
So David Kendall, I was at Williams and Connolly at the time of the whole Clinton fiasco.
Okay.
So that's how I got to know know David. And I just love the story in your book about when he calls the Attorney General Eric Holder and Holder's at the Wizards game.
By the way, we fact checked that. I did look to make sure there was a Wizards game that night at home, and there was.
So great.
Yeah, he told a version of the story on your podcast, and so I re-elicited it from him. But basically, it's the moment David Kendall first hears the name Monica Lewinsky, because it's easy to forget. I think people today don't realize Ken Starr was going for 3-4 years on Whitewater. He was done. And what both David and Lanny Brewer, who was White House counsel at the time, said to me is like, this guy was just playing out the string, hoping. And Lanny said to me, all of a sudden he gets this manna from heaven. And so anyway, David gets a call from Mike McCurry, who's the White House press secretary, and says, we have an emergency call tonight at 9. And Kendall goes, what is it? And he goes, Monica Lewinsky. And Kendall goes, who the hell is Monica Lewinsky? he came to know. Yeah. But anyway, McCurry basically tells the White House emergency team, he goes, the Washington Post is going to run this story about an affair with this intern. So Kendall then calls Eric Holder, who's deputy AG and a straight shooter. And he goes, listen, like, they're off base because this is obviously outside of Ken Starr's purview, his jurisdiction, as approved by Janet Reno and the courts. And there's sort of this sickening silence from Kendall's perspective on the phone. And Holder goes, yeah, you better not get out too far ahead of that one. And Kendall's like, oh, I knew at that moment everything changed.
and go Wizards.
Go Wizards. Yeah, I love that detail. Right, exactly.
It's so good. And
yeah.
One story I didn't know, and when I read it, I couldn't believe it, that Robert Ray gets smuggled into the White House to cut this
David's
deal.
call. Yeah. Yeah. So Bob Ray, who I talked to also, Bob took over for Ken Starr. So this is
Right.
after the impeachment's over, but there's important work that has to be done, including most importantly, like, are you going to indict Bill Clinton when he leaves office in 2001, January? And Bob, he all but answered that question for me. He basically said, I don't want to answer you yes or no, but I'm paraphrasing what he says in the book. But all the pieces that had to be in place were in place if we needed to indict him. And we had put additional witnesses in the grand jury. He basically made clear, if I needed to indict him, I would have. I said, Bob, but you never would have convicted him in 2001 in
Right.
DC. He was super popular. And Bob basically said, like, look, I that's probably correct, but like, I felt like it was my job, but there's this great scene where it's the waning days. It's Christmas, basically end of December. Clinton's got 2-3 weeks left in office, and they're negotiating back and forth over this, what became the deal where Clinton admits some wrongdoing and takes a
Yeah.
fine and agrees to have his bar license suspended. But Bob Ray said, when I was at the SDNY, I would sit down face to face, sometimes with defendants, and tell them what I had. And so I asked for 15 minutes, and they smuggled him in Kendall's car. And Bob Ray sat right across the table from Clinton and basically said to him, like, here's what I'm looking for. And, no drama. And Clinton, it's such a Clintonian moment. Bob said, I said, what did Clinton say? He goes, he didn't say a word the whole time. He just sat there silently,
Imagine.
except at the end, he goes, I had like, so Bob, a few months before, had been at the same Army Navy golf course and then Clinton shows up to play. And Bob Ray was like seen like looking at him or something by the press. And there was a little news article about it. And so Clinton just turns to him and goes, have you been back to the Army Navy course to play at all? And Bob was like, how the hell does he even remember this?
Wow.
And yeah. But of course, that ended up being the deal that came out. And I will tell you, like, I don't have any real memory of this, but this hit like a bomb when that deal, it came out on Clinton's last day in office. And Bob said, this is one of those moments where it was like actual disagreement, because Bob Ray said, the statement that he made, I didn't really care. I just want him to admit he lied. And I didn't even really look at it. Kendall said, we negotiated every syllable
right.
of that statement to the death.
Yeah.
And then I also talked to Saul Weisenberg on Starr's team. Saul was gone by this point. Saul's the guy who asked Clinton the question where Clinton said, it depends on what the meaning of is. But Saul, a couple years later, when this deal comes out, Saul said he was rip shit. He said he felt like the statement was wishy-washy and didn't own up. And so I love getting those like triple perspectives.
Yeah, right. And you would think such a big moment, everybody would be on the same page. Everybody has a different perspective of it. It's wild.
Exactly. By the way, I just remembered one other detail that I love. Bob Ray told me that when they were leaving the White House, they got held up because like a squirrel had tripped the security system outside. So it was like lockdown. So they want to get out of there and they're stuck for 20 minutes while everything gets cleared.
I love that story also. And so I have so many stories that I want to talk about with the book. I'll do a couple more with you. The one, I hope this gets people to buy and read the book because there's so many stories like this, Elie, that I love. After Bill Clinton, of course, we have Hillary Clinton and James Comey, and we were speaking about the Diddy trial before. I like the little fact that Comey's daughter was the lead prosecutor, and Garagos's daughter was one of the lead defense lawyers in that case.
Right.
which I like, but because of course Mark Garagos was involved in Whitewater with both Clintons.
Right.
So James Comey, 11 days before the election, says, I'm reopening things. And really contrary to what the Justice Department says you're supposed to do. And you talk about in the book, like what went into this decision that he had.
So Comey does not fare well in this book. I will tell you that. I asked to speak with him. I actually don't know him. I missed him at the SDNY. I must have started there 6 months after he went down to DC. But we know a million people in common. I've spoken with him in the green room, but he just declined. I don't know why. I mean, the guy's certainly not shy of media. But, I use that story of the way Comey, and to a lesser extent Loretta Lynch, completely botched the Hillary Clinton investigation as the best argument for why we do need some rules. We do need some guardrails. And I thought Rod Rosenstein put it really well to me. Now, Rosenstein, of course, becomes, is the deputy AG. He ends up writing the memo that Trump uses to fire, or at least the pretext to fire Comey. But what Rosenstein said to me is this. He said, Rosenstein and Comey don't get along. It's well known they're not best of friends. But Rosenstein said what Comey did was obviously, a power grab. And he goes, But the problem is he disregarded the rules. And
Right.
he said, the rules are made for the tough cases. It's easy to follow the rules when you like them and when they're easy to apply. He goes, but the reason we have these rules is so they can guide you and maybe even protect you in the tough cases. But I mean, and Comey just went wild. I mean, I quoted an article by former federal judge Noel Hillman, who I know and respect, where he basically said Comey assumed at once the job of assistant attorney general, ethics officer, AG, FBI director, press liaison, a million other things. He did it all himself. But Lynch also had a major lapse in judgment. I asked to speak with her. She wouldn't speak with me either. Not in a negative way. She just declined.
Right.
But Lynch, she has the tarmac meeting with Bill Clinton while the Hillary thing is going on. And she says her own language was that meeting, she regrets it. They didn't talk about anything inappropriate, but she said it cast a, quote, dark shadow over the case. That's Loretta Lynch's words. And so what Lynch should have done, I argue, is A, recuse herself, because you know what? Then Sally Yates would have taken over, deputy AG, no problem, right?
Yeah.
Or appoint a special counsel. She did neither of those things. Instead, she goes, well, I'm not going to remove myself, but I'm going to defer to the FBI. She handed it all over to Comey, who then just he does what Comey does.
Right.
He self-aggrandizes and I do a sort of deep dive in the book. It's probable, not certain, but probable, I conclude that cost Hillary the 2016 election.
I really think it did. It's so nuts. We had a similar situation with the mayor of Tallahassee, Andrew Gillum, where a federal
I know him personally. Yeah.
Yeah, where I represented him in his federal case, and the FBI investigation gets leaked a month before about Hamilton tickets. He lost by a couple thousand votes. He would have won that election, and the state of Florida's direction would have been completely different. I mean, I like how you put it. That's the reason we have these rules, and the FBI leaked that case, which was just it made me crazy. One other story to tell. I have a zillion here, but let's do one more. The Jack Smith and Donald Trump. One of the things I loved about the book, Elie, is all the pop culture references. So I love in this one, you already lost, you just don't know yet, because that's one of my favorite movies. Such a great one. So tell me, how did you come up with all the pop culture references?
I just I'm into I like the pop culture stuff, but that one, that is the one line. This is a 305-page book, 310-page book, and I quote myself one time because I had to. In my prior book, where I was basically arguing it's not going to be as easy to lock Trump up and throw away the key as you think, I wrote in that book, I quoted from the movie Searching Bobby Fischer, which is from the early 90s, a great movie, great movie, right? And there's this unbelievable scene where the kid, the soft-spoken, shy protagonist is playing the big, mean, aggressive bully in the final match, and they're 2 or 3 moves in, and the kid offers it, the protagonist offers his hand, like a draw, and the bully goes, what the hell are you doing? Why would I draw? We're 3 moves in, and the protagonist goes, you've already lost. You just don't know it yet.
So great.
And I directed that line in 2022 at Merrick Garland. And I said in 2022, it's already too late. You don't realize it. Maybe you do. But by the time I opened the chapter on Jack Smith with this sentence, Jack Smith never had a chance. And later on, I say another dated pop culture reference, but I say, if Robert Mueller was Casey at the bat, meaning, the famous poem about the guy who strikes out, Jack Smith was Casey on the bench. He just never even really got up. Because, Garland, and we can, people can debate the reasons why. I give a sort of theory in the book, but Merrick Garland, by the time he appoints Jack Smith, there's no possible way that Jack Smith was going to be able to investigate, indict, deal with the immunity issue, which I also flagged in the last book, and get this case tried. And sure enough, that's the way it played out.
So I like asking all my guests this, and especially since the Searching for Bobby Fischer stuff just came up. One of my hobbies is playing chess. I love playing chess. What hobbies do you, other than writing, and what do you like to do?
I'm a what I would call a decent home chef, cook.
Okay, what's for dinner tonight? What's for dinner?
Good question. So I'm going steakhouse tonight. I just got 2 ribeyes, just me and my son. So I just got 2 ribeyes. I'm going to make a little wedge salad on the side, and it's Jersey corn season, so I'm making Jersey corn. But I grew up working in kitchens. I grew up as a pot washer, a waiter, a cook, catering. And so I don't have highfalutin chef skills, but I'm competent and a little better than that. And it's trial and error. So I love that. If I have a Sunday where I don't have that much to do. Like I'm going to go to the butcher shop to get the good steaks. I'm going to go to, this supermarket to get that. I'm going to, all that. So that's one of my hobbies. My kids are in college now, as of now. So I'm an empty nester as of like today. So I'm going to have more free time.
Are the kids, you want them to be lawyers and prosecutors or no?
I think they're both headed that way. I mean, their mom, my wife, was also a longtime prosecutor at the DNJ. She was the acting U.S. attorney for a year.
Amazing.
So these kids, I'll tell you a quick story that will resonate with your audience especially. So we decided as two prosecutors early on that we would be pretty open with our kids about what we were doing. And we would tell them stories and they loved it. I wouldn't tell them the horrible, like terrifying,
Right.
You can imagine where we drew the line.
Yeah.
But my daughter, when she was like 5, would go, could you tell me a story about a case? And I would go, okay, so this guy would go to the butcher and he would say, if you don't pay me $100 every week, I'll beat you up. Like my mob extortion cases and
Great.
stuff. So we would explain what a trial is and what this is and that is. So one night we're at I forget if it was Thanksgiving or Passover or something, but our whole family is around the table, 15, 20 people. And my son must have been 5 or 6 years old. And my wife goes, Aaron, tell everyone what a trial is, thinking he's going to explain what's going to bad guy. And my son goes, a trial is when you don't see mommy or daddy for a long time. So I know your audience who listens to this, who are a lot of them are practitioners, that'll hit them right in the heart like it is.
That's a great one. And
now he's 20, by the way. He turned out fine.
Yeah, he turned out fine. Well, Elie, I want to thank you for doing this podcast, and I hope everybody goes and gets the book. I really enjoyed it, and there's so many great stories. I'm sorry we only got to cover a few of them, but yeah. I think it's just a terrific book, and I think folks will like reading about the stories.
Thanks, David. This was great. I appreciate it.